Chapter 12 Freedom 1 and Slavery 0. Life 1 and Death 0. Human freedom 1 represents the success of the one in using the zero through the force of repulsion and attraction. When emission and motion for people are successful in reaching absorption, they have freedom. Freedom is the use of human action in filling human space with the physical one of choice. Human slavery 0 is the failure to use the 1 and 0 successfully in reaching absorption. Slavery means repulsion is not used as an effective guide for attraction to proceed. The 1 and 0 of people who are enslaved have reached 1-on-1 and 0-on-0 encounters. They lack the ability for attraction 0-1 and 1-0 to proceed with emission reaching absorption. Slavery 0 is human inaction in not filling human space with a physical one of choice. Contrary to popular opinion, slavery 0 is a necessary prerequisite of freedom 1. The condition of slavery prompts us to learn and achieve the knowledge to attain freedom. Repulsion and not being able to be where we want can result in gaining the knowledge that reveals the motion necessary to arrive at freedom. The 0 of slavery is necessary before it can be filled by the 1 of freedom. Slavery can threaten our existence, depending upon the time it takes to achieve freedom. Some states of slavery are more important to replace right away with a free state. From past applications of slavery, we can gain the necessary knowledge to replace slavery with freedom. As with all opposites, having only one of the other results is not having either. The 0 of slavery and the 1 of freedom define each other and require each other for their anonymic existence. Each political state has its own laws aimed at controlling the conduct of human beings with respect to each other. Each nation's political leadership claims that the purpose and goal of its political law is to establish freedom for all and to create a society where freedom eliminates the impediments and infringements to human progress and achievement. Each leadership seeks a condition where only the good and the positive are meant to dominate. Political leadership alleges to have the best way to accomplish political aim, and millions of human beings have been killed by those who are convinced their political plan will produce heaven on earth. They have claimed that the death of many is a small price to pay for the eventual freedom of many more in the best of all possible worlds. Freedom is not free. We have failed to recognize that the only way we can reach freedom is through impediments, coercion, controls, infringements, and some form of slavery. Freedom has not and will not ever exist without the contrast of its antonymic opposite, slavery. To have exclusive freedom or exclusive slavery is to have neither. The 0 of slavery represents the empty of human spaces required to fill them with the 1 of freedom. The term slavery, as used here, is not limited in usage to man enslaving man. To be enslaved is to be unable to reach your destination through motion. There are in nature many factors that temporarily or permanently enslave us, regardless of the actions of others. The impediment of a boulder blocking our progress on the road leads to our enslavement. We have actually enslaved ourselves by setting our course, unknowingly, toward an immovable object. 1 of car means 1 of boulder. in this case, a 20-ton boulder. This is as much an enslavement process as if a person were blocking our passage. The boulder, as well as humans, can prevent an individual's spaces from being filled. Nature creates many slave conditions. All human progress comes from replacing what stops and impedes his and her progress. Human inability leads to ability. Where man cannot go leads him to where he can go. The contrast of slavery is the vehicle to freedom, and the contrast of obstacles is the vehicle to progress. There are enough challenges in coping with nature against man without the challenges of coping with man against man. Learning to live in harmony with humans will give us more time to deal with nature's slavery that prevents us from exploring the galaxy. If we can enjoy the freedoms derived from getting along together, we can move on to address new forms of nature's slavery. The solution lies in using the slave condition that follows the inefficient use of repulsion to reach freedom that follows the efficient use of repulsion. We must learn to use repulsion to reach attraction and new freedoms so we can spring from another new repulsion, slavery, to another new freedom. If humans survive, this cycle does not end. Our social problems are of value only if we replace them with solutions. Slavery, 0, can be of value only if we replace it with freedom, 1. Nature may dismiss us at any moment if we do not reach solutions to the problems of man's conduct toward man and toward his environment. The longer problems, repulsion, remain, the more difficult and threatening they become. Slavery in some form, problems, must always exist. However, their continued presence, repeating the same slave states, affects our survival capabilities. For human survival, there must be continuing oscillations where the 0 of slave states are displaced, replaced by the 1 of freedom states. These 0 to 1 oscillations must have the proper frequency for survival. Ignorance, 0, is the part of slavery, 0, that leads to knowledge, 1, and freedom, 1. If we remain ignorant, slavery can destroy us. The oscillation between slavery and freedom is an ongoing process. The idea may disturb some, but the 1 of freedom's arrival can only be reached through the 0 of slavery and the opposite state of not being free. To retain slavery is to turn off motion to arrival events as a switch turns from the on 1 to off 0. Reaching freedom turns on motion to arrival events as a switch turns from off to on. As in all switches, there is no on without off, or off without an on. See corollary number 9. The 0 of the off of slavery is necessary for the 1 of the on of freedom, and the 1 of the on of freedom is necessary for another off of the 0 of slavery. The universe pulsates between the off and on, 0 and 1 fluctuations. In dictionary usage, freedom is the lack of coercion or constraints in the choice of action. The antonym slavery is the presence of coercion and constraints preventing the choice of action. And action is the process of emission to absorption. Action is the dynamics of attraction using repulsion in enabling the 1 to use the 0. Notice that the terms coercion, constraints, and control are used to define freedom. This is an example of how opposites define each other. Without these negative terms, how can we define the positive term of freedom and conversely? As has been stressed, the positive concept of freedom is not possible without the negative concept of slavery. The degree of freedom you have had and will have depends on your successful arrivals from your successful departures. The reason one person's freedom will be different from another person's freedom is that one chooses to fill their space differently. If you have achieved a great many states of freedom, it means that you have also gone through many states of slavery. They are the price, the dues we pay in life to enjoy the benefits that flow from a state of freedom. All the negative connotations in our lives, which may include struggle, failure, frustration, and disappointment, are part of these slave states that are necessary pathways to positive opposites. We must avoid putting ourselves in a slave state from which we cannot escape. This is the value of the long-term view. The long-term view allows us to see how these repulsion effects can have influence upon us far into the future. A short-termer is one who does not look beyond the results of the next action, emission to absorption. To be always in a state of freedom is to be always in a state of perfection, which is unattainable. To move from the state of slavery to the state of freedom is the challenge of life. If we knew how to be everywhere at all times, there would be no reason to exist. The reason we create goals and challenges is to encourage the action necessary to reach them. Not being at the arrival state of freedom is prerequisite to the arrival of freedom. Freedom arrives in individual chunks of the successful occupation of human space. In between these freedom chunks are individual chunks of slavery. There is a continual series of imprisoned states with escape and freedom in between. If humans do not enslave you, this does not mean you are free. Immigrants arriving in a free country after escaping from a slave state very often bring their slavery with them. After being controlled by their masters, they are suddenly thrust into a society where they must make their own decisions and achieve their own freedoms. Until they can do this, they are still slaves. You can unlock the prison doors, but the doors will remain closed until the prisoner reaches the necessary acts of emission and absorption and opens them. You may be shown pathways to freedom, but you must always walk the path for your arrival at your destination. It can be discouraging and even devastating to realize that you do not know how to create solutions for your survival. The victims of political paternalism may be crippled to the point where they may not be able to survive on their own. For them, the reality of what was thought to be freedom may turn into a nightmare. To be free is to possess the liberty to attempt to move from a problem to a solution, which includes the liberty to attempt to move from a slave state to a freedom state. The challenge of parenting is to allow children the liberty to reach their own slave states from which they can learn to extricate themselves and reach their own freedom states. It takes courage to teach children survival techniques while protecting them from the hazards of non-survival situations. When overprotected children are not allowed to learn to remove the lesser slave states of youth, then as adults they may lack the skills to remove the greater slave states of adulthood. Would it be of value to teach our children that life is a series of problem-to-solution phases? The most valuable gifts parents can give their children are the tools to successfully move in and out of these off and on fluctuations. Reason tells us that we would not know how to prevent coercion, controls, and attacks without experiencing them. To know how to protect ourselves from such interferences adds to our ability to reach more freedom. But we would never know about the concept of protection without a slavery that necessitates that protection in the first place. The ability to protect comes from the inability to protect. We learn from the limitations of slavery on how to rid ourselves of limitations. We use our experiences with negatives to go on to create bigger and better positives. The slave condition creates the hardships of life. It is against the backdrop of the hard that we learn the meaning of the easy. Not being there, no arrival, and being there, arrival, is this 0 and 1 oscillation. Slavery presents the problem of how we can fill the holes, 0, of choice. Freedom is the displacement and the removal of the 0 of slavery by the filling of the 1. If some insist upon enslaving others as a means to attain their own liberty, then they cannot avoid the risks of such actions. Behind every solution lies the next problem, and behind every problem lies the next solution. The problem confronting a slave may be temporarily solved through the termination of the slave master. By causing a problem for another person, you place him in a position of having to solve that problem. It is a mistake to assume that those with problems created through others cannot solve them. A thief is the slave master of those from whom he steals, but the thief augments the hazard of seriously enslaving himself, especially should he be caught, tried, and jailed. Whether it is humans or nature that enslaves us, slavery will continue to be a part of our existence. It is important that we do not always remain a part of the same slavery. When we keep repeating the same mistakes that lead to the same slavery, we are stuck in the proverbial vicious cycle. It is paramount to know that freedom is self-created. You endow it upon yourself. We have been created to be creators. To survive is to create freedoms for ourselves. This means we cannot wait for someone else to give us freedom. How often do people say, "If only someone would stop doing this to me, I would be free"? In believing this, one sets himself to be enslaved. It is never someone else who gives you freedom. It is your own action, motivated by a repulsion from a state of slavery, that gives you freedom. By waiting without action, the individual cuts himself off from going through emission to absorption. The proactive achiever uses enslavement as his guide to freedom. Only the individual can determine how many freedoms he or she earns in life. The freedoms you have earned determine how you think of yourself today. Reaching a state of slavery can give us a purposeful learning how to extricate ourselves from this negative condition. Freedom can only be earned by the earner. A teacher may show you how to be free, but you must accomplish freedom for yourself through individual action. In the Lawrence Sanders novel The Marlowe Chronicles, the protagonist, Marlowe, asks his son, "Who gave you any guarantees? The Declaration of Independence says you can pursue happiness. It doesn't say anything about catching it." A greater state of happiness follows a greater state of freedom achieved through the successful arrival of our aims. We may fail to always find happiness through its pursuit, motion, but the pursuit is requisite to its attainment. The unhappiness, slavery, found in the effort, work, struggle, and failure to solve problems creates the necessary contrast that define happiness, freedom, and solutions. This awareness of contrasts can give us the courage to endure happiness in the present with a prospect of great happiness in the future, but there are no guarantees we can ever reach our goals. This gives meaning to the challenge. The magnitude of the successes and rewards in life is measured by the magnitude of the challenge. The greater the challenge, the greater the reward. Life 1 and death 0. The ability to experience comes from the ability to live. Living includes the experiences of both life and death. Having left the realm of the living, those who die cannot experience their own death. It is only the living who experience life and death. By introducing the 0, we can reach a better identification of life and death. How do we experience death while alive? As will be explained, during an individual's life, death comes from life and life comes from death. Life and freedom are derived from the 1, and death and slavery are derived from the 0. It is the contrast between pairs of opposites which allows definitions. Freedom 1 defines slavery 0, and slavery 0 defines freedom 1. Life 1 defines death 0, and death 0 defines life 1. The 1 defines the 0, and the 0 defines the 1. This interchangeable relationship between the 1 of life and the 1 of freedom, and the 0 of death and the 0 of slavery, as well as all opposites, is created by the 0 and 1 base for all opposites. Life 1 depends upon our action and success at using the forces of repulsion and attraction to reach the emission and absorption phases of choice. Life springs from the action leading to the success of filling our spaces. The 0 is displaced by 1. Death 0 involves our inaction and failure to utilize these two forces of attraction and repulsion to reach the emission and absorption phases of choice. Death is the inaction that does not lead to the filling of our spaces. The 1 is not displaced by the 0. What happens when those near and dear to us die? They continue to be dear, but they are no longer near. While living, they brought life to us because we were able to move toward and reach an absorption with them. They fill our spaces as we fill their spaces. To absorb includes the act of being absorbed. A love that works is reciprocal because to love is part of the ability to be loved. The root source of love can be found in one's ability to absorb through being absorbed. In such a case, I want to fill 1, your spaces 0, so I can fill 1, my spaces 0, and conversely, you want to fill my spaces so I can fill your spaces. A reciprocal value is created. Love is value for value exchange. You allow me to be where I want to be, and simultaneously, I allow you to be where you want to be. The 1s of each person use the 0s of each person to reach a fill for both persons. The 1s of each have displaced the 0s of each. When two friends embrace each other, the empty of each is filled. The physical of each other organizes the space next to each other and is filled by each other. The 0 of death for both has been replaced by the 1 of life for both. Filling each other's spaces can be accomplished merely by looking at each other. Light particles, 1, from each are absorbed by each with the adjacent non-light 0 contrasting frame of reference. This contrast creates the image of the person you are looking at. To look at each other is to absorb and be absorbed. You are absorbing my light while I am absorbing your light. To absorb each other is to receive the 1 of life from each other. The death of a close friend throws the switch to a permanent and unfilled off. We can no longer switch to a filled on. Our expression of love is the value we place on being where we want to be, fill. Experiencing life and love with our friends is now lost through death. In death, only a zero remains with the departure of their organized ones and zeros. We, the living, now have a zero on zero encounter of repulsion because with death, attraction can no longer reach arrival. We have only the zeros of others to fill. Gone is the one of the deceased who provided the zero we loved to fill. The apart, empty phase can no longer reach the together phase, fill. Our zeros can never again be displaced by this important one, and their zeros can never again be displaced by our ones. When their special ones are gone, their special zeros are also gone. A life one experience for us is lost and replaced by death zero because our zeros can never be filled again by the one of the deceased. This is one form of a permanent death for us, but there are other forms of permanent and temporary death. The possibility for life to continue through absorption may exist, but humans commonly place impossible obstacles in life's way. Until we use the impossible to reach the possible, we experience a form of death. Depending upon our actions, death can last a lifetime, or we can convert death to life when the problem zero of obstacles is solved, 1. A problem is a form of death, 0, which is solved by the creation of life, 1. Solutions then bring us life. This is deeper meaning behind life and death and how it relates to our lives and the common perception. This is another way of showing how all opposites are related. Opposites are the children of the universal binary source, 0 and 1. Love is a value we place on the decisions we make to be where we want to be. Love and life are related because the love of arrival is what gives us life and is life. In contrast, we abhor the opposite of life and love, death and hate. Death and hate are the problems. Love and life are the solutions created out of these problems. The things we most dislike become the principal problems in our life. Problems are a form of death. Obstacles we dislike, which are necessary opposites of life and love. Death and our dislikes are problems and obstacles on the path to life and love and the things we like. The force of repulsion is then against us. Nevertheless, we use repulsion and the impossible in creating life and the possible. Death is a 0 that may be replaced with a 1 of life. Most human problems do not need to be permanent. Death does not allow us to provide absorption, life, and love for ourselves and other objects. The impossible of death, problems, can be used to reach the possible of life, solutions. Most of the problems we experience are a temporary form of death rather than the permanent form in the death of a friend. Temporary forms in death are temporary because they can be transformed into life. If death is the inability and failure to absorb and be absorbed, then we can observe that most forms of death are problems that can be used to reach absorption, solutions. In this sense, we spend our lives fluctuating between life 1 and death 0. This is another way to explain that life is a fill 1 and death is an empty 0. The empty of death is necessary to attain the fill of life. Not having a vehicle to get where we want is a form of death. When this is the case, we cannot reach an absorption event in gaining life and what we love. With effort and time, this form of death, 0, can be transformed into life 1 by solving the problem of obtaining the necessary vehicle. There are parallels between the impact upon us when death denies us access to our loved ones and the impact upon us when we are denied access for any reason to the other things we love. The inability to access any of the things we love is a form of death. Death is the zero that is denied access to the one of life. Some may be permanent forms of death, while others may be replaced with life. Permanent or temporary forms of death occur when access to absorption, the filling of our spaces, is permanently or temporarily inaccessible. The marketplace is an example of the fluctuations of death and life, problems and solutions, hate and love. The market is composed of buyers and sellers. The sellers offer life, solutions, and the things we like. The buyers are buying to eliminate the negatives of death, problems, and the things they dislike. Why does the seller sell the solutions to the buyer? The prior existence of the negatives for the buyer motivates the seller to procure these positive solutions. The zero of the buyer's negatives is necessary for the seller's procurement and sale of the positive one. The seller recognizes that his success is based on solving the problems of the buyer. The seller provides the one of the solution for the displacement of the buyer's zero of the problem. Without the zero of death, problems, and the things we dislike, we would not have a marketplace to offer the one of solutions, life, and the things we like. In fact, we would not even have a civilization. This same principle states that a stop is necessary for a start, an off is necessary for an on, a negative is necessary for a positive, and a zero is necessary for a one. The buyer wants successful emission to absorption phases. The seller acts to procure the buyer's successes because selling them allows the seller to reach his solutions, leading to his own successful emission and absorption phases. The marketplace provides a value-for-value exchange, which includes trading the things one trader values for the things another trader values. The buyer says, "Give me the solutions I value, usually in goods and services, and in exchange I will give you the money to purchase solutions that you value." Money is the medium of exchange to facilitate filling one, present and future holes zero. Earned money, not unearned, is a measure of man's progress towards successful emission and absorption. The value of earned money is a vessel for the storage of past solutions, which can be used for the payment of future solutions. Within earned money is a reservoir of life that can be exchanged for new life. When money is earned, it represents the solutions, life, we have provided for others. This earned money is then used to purchase life, solutions for ourselves. Value remains part of money as long as it is backed by the creation of solutions, life. Money is a storage of the ones of life that are used to replace the zeros of death. The loss of the value of money occurs when the one of solutions, life, is not a part of money. The marketplace is the field of exchange that enables people to facilitate life experiences of solutions through absorption. The marketplace allows death to life, problem to solution fluctuations. The true heroes of society create these life and solution events. Everyone is involved in this process for their survival, but there are some whose efforts increase everyone's potential for survival. Among these are scientists and technologists who have provided important solutions for a better life for greater numbers on our planet. Unfortunately, most people do not know why they are alive and where the value of their life has come from. Who are the great innovators who are primarily responsible for our lives and standard of living beyond subsistence? It is important to have a rational direction of thanks and gratitude for what we have. With this understanding, sensitize us to the value of the accomplishments that have led to the continuation of life. It is important to know the sources of the engines of civilization. This knowledge shows us what is worth protecting and building, and it gives us a positive direction for our own lives. Without the operation of the marketplace, we would lose these death to life, problems to solutions, oscillations. More than this, we would lose our ability to experience anything. Experience represents these emptying, death, and filling life fluctuations. Life and death, problems and solutions, are experienced one after the other or not at all. We use death, 0, to reach new forms of life, 1, and life, 1, to reach new forms of death, 0. Are the biological processes of which we are a part the only forms, structures, that are capable of having these death and life, empty and fill, negative and positive, and emission and absorption processes? Consider the universe of atomic structures of which we are a part. Do these structures also fluctuate between death and life, empty and fill, negative and positive, emission and absorption? Human methods of emission and absorption are unique, but does this mean that there cannot be other unique systems of emission and absorption? Let us consider the possibility of another unique systems of emission and absorption as having a life of their own. Can we consider all objects capable of these oscillations as having life? Are humans an extension of and a combination of an atomic universe that also oscillates between emission and absorption, empty and fill, death, 0, and life, 1? Who has the greater intelligence, the builder or those who have been built? Who has the greater capacity for creation, the builder or what is built? Have we been built by our underlying atomic combinations? Are we an extension of the emission and absorption principle that is also a part of atomic structure? Is the microcosm capable of organizing our structure with the same principles we use to organize the structures that are part of our civilization? If this is possible, perhaps we should look inward for a greater understanding of intelligence and life. Are we merely extensions of life forms that built us in the same way that cars, trucks, and computers are extensions of our life forms? Have the builders of our structure built us to aid them in their life and death oscillations in the same way we build structures to aid us in our life and death oscillations? Do the builders of humans live within us as we live within our structured civilization? Is it possible that the greater intelligence lies within? Have objects within the realm of our subatomic domain designed and created us, which has led to our designing and creating civilization? Perhaps the builders of the human structure represent intelligent life that emit and absorb within us as we in turn emit and absorb in the structures we have built. It is possible that advanced life forms have built us for their survival and evolutionary advancement as we must build for our survival and evolution. I am hypothesizing that all creations derive from an infinite series of creators. Each creator is an extension of a previous creator. As a species, to continue our viability, we must continue to become better and better creators. What we eventually build may someday be perceived as a separate entity in much the same way that we perceive ourselves as separate entities. But there can never be a complete separation because each creator in turn is dependent upon its creator. life continues to extend itself with each new creation. We have been built for the same reason we build for ourselves. The driving force of nature is to oscillate better and better within the stages of emission and absorption. The universe is in a constant evolutionary building process for the purpose of emission and absorption. Humans are a small piece of this larger fluctuating and pulsating process. It is all tied together with one structure as a part of the whole. A solution always leads to other problems to be solved by other solutions. This is the basis for nature's constant building pattern. Those who cannot resolve problems with solutions make way for those who can. This is the essence of evolutionary biology and survival of the fittest. Nature has its own built-in method of quality control. The creators that have created us and remain a part of us have created a continuous transformation of death into life. How long will humans last? Will we someday be underlying and unseen creators of what may become a new life form? Are we already doing this through our building of civilization? Is the city a new form of life? A timely question is, can we develop a new life form that will be capable of interstellar emission and absorption events? If our species survives in time, we may achieve a creation that exceeds our present imagination.